You're listening to Trek FM.
Want to join in the conversation and share your thoughts on this episode? Join the Babel Conference, our listeners' discussion group on Facebook. Just type BABEL into the Facebook search field, and we'll look forward to seeing you there. Well, hello and welcome to the Indy Files, our special podcast here in the 602 Club feed talking about the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles. And I am just so excited to be back here in the new year as we're going to be diving into actually a couple of episodes. And with me, as he is every single episode on this wonderful journey, is none other than Yancy Evans. Yancy, how are you doing, man?
Just got back from an adventure in Africa, and I'm feeling the jets are. Also, had the nice long Christmas break. My jets are regassed, and I'm ready to go.
Man, I am really excited to dive into this one. Before we get into everything, you could find us all over social media. We're on Instagram at the 602 Club TFM. We've also got ourselves on X Twitter. We're at the 602 Club. You can also find us online with the entire network over at Trek.fm. We're on Facebook at facebook.com/TrekFM, and we're super excited that you can also join us over on Patreon at patreon.com/TrekFM and see how you can become part of the team. Plus, help us out, help the 602 Club feed out, plus, of course, Indy Files and all the other great bonus shows that you can find here. Give us a star rating review over on Apple Podcasts. Help people find the show. In the new year, one of the best ways to grow a podcast is still people sharing the show with their friends. So you can do that on social media or even just in person. If you like movies and stuff, and you know people that like that as well, make sure you share us. So, Yancy, like we mentioned, we're going to be talking about two different episodes tonight, and really because they are back-to-back episodes in many ways, story-wise. You've got German East Africa, December 1916, and then you've got Congo, January 1917. And so these stories go together. And of course, if you have the DVD copies of this, they are actually put together as one long-form movie for an hour and a half. But I wanted to ask you about this because I think specifically with the German East Africa in December 1916, the bookend is very much tied into the storyline that we get as Indy is telling this story. He's at the hospital, and a young girl comes in that's been shot, and the guy sitting next to him just basically is like, "C'est la vie, that's life. It happens." And so Indy tells him this story. So I wanted to ask you what you thought of this bookend, and because it is an interesting perspective to have watched the movie version of this. And then to come back and watch the bookends and see how they started the episodes when they originally aired on TV. So what did you end up thinking of that?
Yeah, I really love the bookends on both these episodes, but in particular the first one, because I think it really sets up the two episodes really well, which is so he's sitting next to this guy named Mike, who's like, he looks like a truck driver type guy. He's what we would probably call I wouldn't call him a racist. It's not like he has any animus toward the girl or anything, but he has this, casual racism attitude of, she got shot in a gang shooting and she's an innocent victim. And, that kind of thing happens in the inner city. And as you said, it's kind of a c'est la vie kind of thing. And what the episode really does a good job of, or the bookends really do a good job, is reinforcing this idea that, you can't take life casually, and you don't know, if a kid gets shot in the street, you don't know what that kid could potentially be. You don't know who he could have been. And it's very much for lack of a better word, it's very much kind of like a pro-life message. It's very much every life has meaning and value. And I think that really reinforces that well. And especially for, your kids watching this, kind of giving them kind of a perspective on it's a morality tale. It's what's the lesson of this episode, that kind of thing. So I really enjoyed that because at the end, Mike has been moved. And I think that's the way a lot of people are, is they're not in being intentionally, neutral about people. It's just they don't have an experience with this person, with this situation. So people tend to kind of remove themselves from things they're not familiar with. And so this is just a great way of reinforcing that, well, we're all on this planet together, we all interact with each other, and you never know, that little girl who got, shot off screen, she might have she might be a future leader of the world. She might become a doctor herself. So,
yeah. Yeah, I think it is very interesting because I have the DVDs, and so I watched this together as the film, and then I came back and I watched the bookends for both of the episodes to see how obviously that played out. And, I think it was an interesting thing to come back and see the way, that was handled, because it is a different experience. I think I liked the way that you put it, in the sense of there is this, and I don't even know, like you called it casual racism, but I almost felt like the way they portray Mike is just somebody who has become immune to the things that happen around him. The ways in which I think the modern world, and this is something I think that is even more so today, right? We're just so inundated with tragedy that's happening in our world. We can become really callous to it. And I think that's what I would say he feels very callous, right? Like, oh, well, another one bites the dust, basically. And it's not because he is a mean person. It's just because I think he's become immune to seeing these things happen. And I think there's a real danger that this episode does show when you have the bookend of that being the case. I think the other side of this, though, that I also found really interesting in light of the bookends and then the movie presentation, is that I think that I would say that the bookend version is better for kids. Like, for kids watching this, I think it works better. It makes the subtext text in a way that, helps them put two and two together. The beauty, though, is that watching the film version of this with the two episodes together, I didn't need that. I'm an adult, right? And so that does come through in the episode, this idea that all lives matter. And even if it's difficult, even if it's inconvenient, us taking care of one life can make a difference. And of course, in the movie version, we don't know what this kid goes on to do. But I think in some ways, even not knowing what this kid goes on to do, it still sets the message of, by saving this one life, in some ways, almost like we've saved ourselves. Right?
Yep.
And so I really appreciated that. And again, I think that's where, if you're watching this with kids, the bookends, and this episode specifically with the German East Africa, December 1916, actually play in really importantly. And then again, I think as an adult, it's almost like the way in which this story is structured, and because these are legitimately back-to-back stories that actually do have a start to finish in the first place, it actually plays incredibly well as the movie, because there's very little connecting work that they had to do to make that work. So yeah, I really enjoyed that. And so,
well, I think that goes to having such a strong story basis from George, but then such a terrific script from Frank Darabont, who wrote both episodes.
Yeah.
And it's just, it's just it's a well-written episode. And to your point, if you just watch the movie version, which that's the version that most people are going to see, like if you go and buy the show on, iTunes right now, that's the version you're going to get is the movie version. It's still a fantastic movie. So,
well, and I think I got to talk about that because Frank Darabont, who worked on both of these episodes, right, and is known for things like The Green Mile and The Shawshank Redemption.
yep.
I think just does a fabulous job here. And it's crazy to think, he was also just working on Stranger Things season 5. So the guy is still working. The guy still does incredible work. And, the fact that he's also a writer with George in this, I think it really shows because a lot of the things that he is known for in his storytelling, I think really do shine through. And it's just it was one of those things where when I saw his name, I was like, okay, that makes complete sense.
Yeah. Go ahead. That's I was just going to say ditto.
So with the interesting part of this story, like Indy comes face to face with this this struggle that everybody has, I think, in the military or any highly organized organization. The whole thing about being given enough free will, being given enough room to utilize one's strengths, and also to realize that sometimes that the orders that we are given may or may not actually be the best choice in that moment. And of course, that happens very soon in the episode with they're told to retreat. And Indy is paying enough attention to this assault in East Africa against the Germans where he realizes that the machine gun that they were retreating from is actually jammed. And so this is actually their time to go forward because it might not happen again. And of course, he does, and he leads the men to victory in that. And he's also given a captaincy because of it. But the other guy, the other man in charge...
The major, yeah.
Yeah, the major gives him a dressing down as if he had done something wrong, and really it was just because he didn't follow his orders. And I loved this because, again, this is such a important aspect of growing up and becoming a more mature being and person, and the decisions that we have to make based off of the people that we might work with or the organizations we might be a part of, knowing and understanding that, yeah, just because somebody's ahead of you and gives you an order doesn't always mean that that is going to be the right course of action.
Yeah, what I appreciated about this episode so much, and me having been in the military, was how well it kind of handled that, because Major Boucher, the guy who's in charge of the unit that Andy's in, is not a bad guy, and and the dressing down is actually warranted because he disobeyed Major Boucher's orders. Now, in Andy's defense, Major Boucher doesn't have all the information that Andy has available to him, which is he sees the machine gun, and so he decides to run at the German machine gun nest. But to Major Boucher's point, that had this not worked out, had Andy not gotten there in time, it would have been an utter disaster. So and that plays later on in the episode, when we get to the units being, decimated by disease, and the storyline with the little boy they find in the village along their journey to go and get this gun that they need to deliver in the second half of the episode. And again, it becomes this struggle of, do I follow an order? What's my moral obligation to the men around me, the kid that I just found? What's the right decision in this place? And I love the fact that Darabont wisely writes Boucher. He's not a bad man. He's just very much by the book. He's very much, there needs to be order, there needs to be structure, otherwise everything falls apart. Indy kind of skirts that line and at times just brazenly crosses it. But the other thing too is what I really appreciated from the episode too was that Indy actually does learn a lot from Boucher, and the way he handles things that happen later on in the episode, like the kid, he actually takes the blame for the kid, rather than letting um, um, the African troop that he has with him. I think they're called Atakari or something like that. Um, they he actually takes the blame for this rather than the troop, so the troop won't get lined up and shot for insubordination. So Andy learns a lot. That's the thing I love about these two particular episodes is Andy does learn a lot, and you can see kind of a growth in his character arc. So that's what I really appreciated.
Yeah, I think that something that you mentioned is really the kind of the standout of this episode specifically, and it's that just because we're given an order doesn't make that the right thing to do. There's a difference between orders and what is right. And, doing what is right may require us to disobey orders. And that's what we see in this episode. And I think there's something really important in that lesson. And, I also think that the interesting part of this is that we end up seeing that, if you make a tough decision like Indy does, there can be naturally good consequences or naturally bad consequences to that. Thankfully, this works out for them, but there is a scenario in this where by saving the child, it leads to something happening that actually causes all of their deaths. And so I think that's also the place that comes down to that just because you do the right thing doesn't mean there isn't going to be risk involved with that.
Right.
And so, I think this is just handled with a lot of deftness, and it's one of the things that, again, you don't necessarily expect to have this kind of depth, I don't think, in a show like this. And I think one of the things that I found with the connection of the movie version of this and it playing all as one story, right? You really do get to see the way in which, like you said, all of the things that Indy learns from the Major, he puts a lot of that into practice, and a lot of that determination and grit is actually what keeps as many men alive as he can keep alive in this.
Exactly.
And his determination, of course, to, like the Major, to carry out the mission, right? And I think that's something that it's one of those things, like, this is the show. It's Young Indiana Jones Chronicles, and so what we're doing is we're watching Indy wrestle with these things that make the character that we would know later on in the films. And, I think, this is an episode specifically where you can kind of see how it comes to play in Temple of Doom, right? Which chronologically is the first film.
Right.
And
it's like in George and his timelines. Even this show does it.
But there's something great about that, right? Because Indy can't leave the kids once he realizes what's happening there.
Yeah. Yeah.
In that film.
I never even thought about that really until I rewatched this, and I'm like, oh, that actually kind of makes Indy's choice at the end of, I mean, I know George probably wasn't thinking about that necessarily, but it actually does give him a motivating factor about why he makes the choice to go back for the slave children in Temple of Doom.
Well, and just like this, it's at his own peril, right?
Yeah.
And the peril of Short Round and of Willie. And so, yeah, I think I also just really loved the way in which the episode they save the child, and they're able to give him to the nuns, and he's raised, and of course we learn that he becomes the first president of that country.
Right.
And I think there's something is so interesting about that. But another important aspect of this, of course, is the discussion of why this war is happening and why they're there, and what good is it.
Right.
And I think it's wonderful that this episode really does deal with a lot of the ambiguities, especially about World War I, that Indy is learning the world is much more nuanced and complicated than he believed it to be. And I think that is also an important lesson that everybody begins to learn, especially in their teenage to young adult years, that wow. And unfortunately, I think in some ways kids are learning this even earlier than that, because of their exposure to social media and everything. But yeah, that's a huge lesson that Indy learns here in this, about that not everybody thinks the way he does about the reason that they're there. And even the men who are with them, the Askari African soldiers, well, they're there basically because they've been conscripted, not because they necessarily want to be. What they just want is to be able to rule their own country. And so I all of that is really well handled. I think it's really nuanced. And it does go to show that even if you have the best of intentions, you can end up finding yourself in a place that you didn't expect for reasons that you didn't expect either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that. I love that discussion they have in the middle of the journey about what's going to happen to this country when the fighting's over. What's the intention of the Belgians and the French? Are they just going to replace the Germans and rule over them, or and then of course Andy with his kind of almost naive American attitudes. Oh well, you'll be able to rule over yourselves, because that's kind of the natural idea, the idea that a young person would have coming out of America at that age, when it's like, well, maybe not, because
right,
everybody's jostling for political power and resources, and unfortunately,
yes,
100%. These countries are caught in the middle of that.
And I got to say that the other beauty of this is that think about this. Indy is writing to T.E. Lawrence, who is right now engaged in being Lawrence of Arabia. And what is his goal is to see Arabia be left to the Arabians.
Right.
And what happens at the end of World War I?
Right.
The European nations come in and make arbitrary lines that give us the problems that we've had for the rest of the 20th and the 21st century.
Exactly.
And partly because they don't know what they don't know, and they won't listen to somebody who does know, mainly T.E. Lawrence, whose ideas about this would have been much better served if we had followed them. And so I think that's the thing, too, that made this really fascinating, because there is a subtle reference to kind of what's going to happen to much of Africa, especially after World War I, that's going to mirror exactly what happened in Arabia after World War I.
Yep. Agreed. And then I love how, and then the other thing, I love how, so this episode in particular is handled, it even though it's, even though it's got all these heady issues going on, it's handled very much like a traditional Hollywood African adventure. We're going through the Congo, all these dark jungles, and we've got to make our way through and all this. And at the end, the heroes either succeed or fail. And but I love how the second half of the second episode, now we transition to more of it's more of an adventure of philosophy and theology, which is just a really, it's just crazy on the one hand that you're doing this, because the second half of the story is primarily heady ideas. There's a lot less. It starts with a continuation of some of the adventure, because they've got to get the guns to this one location. But then it moves into, when they encounter Albert Schweitzer, it moves into this whole other realm, which further reinforces the lessons from the first half, but really kind of brings them all home, which I really loved.
Yeah, I thought this episode was incredibly beautiful, and a big part of that was, the juxtaposition, especially as you watch this as a film. There is a real juxtaposition between these powers that are at war with one another in countries that are not their own, and a man who, because of his faith, comes to the middle of nowhere to take care of people he does not know. And I thought that was really, really beautiful. And I personally was not super familiar with Schweitzer, and I think he would be something really fascinating to read up about, because the little I did was really fascinating and interesting. And so, but from what I did read, his faith was incredibly important to him, his faith in God, and it is what drove him to do what he did, which is to go start this hospital. And I think that is, again, that is the complete opposite of everything that we're seeing in this war scenario, where people don't even, as we saw in the previous episode we talked about, in episode 4, where we were discussing what happened then, so many people don't even know why they're in this war. They don't understand why they're really even fighting. And so I really enjoyed this episode for that. And I thought it was a great follow-up to the episode that happened previously, and they really do create this very nice, tight-knit story.
Yeah, the thing that struck me is it's almost in a way kind of almost a reverse Conrad's Hearts of Darkness, which was then made into Apocalypse Now. It's like the antithesis of it, which is, instead of finding the madman in this world of chaos around him, you find this man who's incredibly well-centered, because he has a firm moral foundation and how he views the world and the people who inhabit the world, and not just the people, but also the creatures that inhabit the world.
Yeah. And
he's at harmony with the world, in this world that is spinning out of control and completely chaotic around him. And so, Indy's kind of almost like Willard, in Apocalypse Now. And instead of finding Kurtz, at the end of the jungle, he finds Albert Schweitzer, who teaches him about the reverence, his philosophy of the reverence of life. And it's a beautiful story, and it really brings home what the first half of the film, if you see it as a film, or the episode before it, episode 5, it really brings the whole thing home. That we have to realize that we're in a world with other creatures, other people, and everybody is in, a competition of will to live. Everybody wants to live, and do we have the right to take a life? Do we have the right to cease somebody from living? And even he doesn't give Indy the full answers at the end, but he leaves him with the thought that, you at least have to ask that question. Even in the middle of a war, you at least have to ask that question, because it's going to affect you in ways that you're at the time incapable of even realizing, and understanding that you're part of a larger, this kind of harmonious thing that God has put together, and you're part of it. And where's my part in this? It's just, yeah, I really love the second half of this, the second half. I really did, because I just thought I thought it was, there's so many, there's so many moments that are just like, you really, like when he goes and works on the kid in the other village, just the joy that the kid had, that his pain's gone, and it's just, and then also bringing in Bach, who was really important to his early work as an organist and a composer. And it's just absolutely gorgeous episode.
And I think that...
Go ahead. Yeah, you go ahead. I've been talking long enough.
I think that there's something really important about the episode too, because, in the midst of this war, right, Schweitzer is thrown out of Africa by the French because he's German. And that's the only reason. And so this very monochromatic view of the world, that it's only black and white. And so you're German, so you've got to be the bad guy. You can't be here. And I think that, look, this is the thing that we still run into today, right? That just because somebody is fill in the blank, then that means that we jump to the conclusion that they must be this, and instead of actually spending the time to get to know somebody and then making a determination about who they are. And I really appreciated that about the episode. I think, again, it's a strong connection to the previous episode, and it's one of those things where all of the thematic elements through both of the episodes flow together so well. And you could tell, obviously, that Darabont had a hand in helping Lucas craft these two stories, and of course they also aired back to back with one another, right? They were the episodes that followed one another. And so I really appreciated this episode too, because I think it gave Indiana a really good appreciation for not judging a book by its cover. Just because somebody is, say, German does not mean that they are the enemy. And of course, too, it only takes like 5 minutes to be there to realize this guy is not there for political purposes. He is there for redemptive purposes of making sure that people are cared for healthcare wise, because he loves them, because of his love for God. And so I really appreciated that. I thought that was great.
Yeah. And I love the way how it all kind of came home for Andy in the scene after they've healed the young boy in the other village, when they're talking to the chieftain of the village, and how he just can't wrap his mind about it, because typically you learn that when there's a fight between villages, between tribes, you have to pay compensation for the men that were killed in the battle that ensued. Even if you're the victor, you have to pay compensation for the men that were killed. And so he's thinking, oh, well, is it like 3 men who've died? Is it 5 men? Is it 10? And the man just can't even fathom, and Andy's realizing, oh my God, this guy has no idea what we're talking. We're talking about thousands upon thousands upon thousands of men, and just and it really brings home the idea to him that, these politicians and these men that are sending them off to war, to them, life is cheap. It doesn't have the same value that this tribe has on a person, because that person might be an integral part of the tribe. They may need them for some purpose. They may be the only healer in the village. They may be the only person who can do this or that. And so when you start looking at people as like a ledger, an economic ledger, it really is, it's really eye-opening. And I think that's where Indy kind of, what Schweitzer has been talking to him about this whole episode it finally hits him. Oh, wow, that's what this is all about.
Yeah, and I think the beauty of that is that it connects very well with the previous episode that we had, and it that did a great job of putting that into focus. That yes, these people don't really care about the people under their command. They're willing to send them to their death if that's what leads them to quote unquote victory. And I think there's something terrifying, obviously, about seeing people who don't care about people under their command. And that's one of the things I think that puts these two episodes together, because when we think about the 1916, the episode right before this, that's very much a part of what Indy is saying about the child that they come across, that this child's life matters. We shouldn't just throw it away and pretend like it doesn't. And I really appreciate, the fact that both of these episodes are trying to show that, yes, we have to find a way to care about people. And it is not weakness, and it is not wrong to do so. And yeah, it's both of these episodes are just really great episodes. And I think, it's one of those things where the show is just continually, I think, getting better and better in that sense of really bringing home everything that it's trying to do. Like I think that it's never faltering in what it's trying to do in that way, and that's just really impressive for a show, again, that's made for kids. And I think trying to get these thought processes across to a younger generation can be really difficult. And, where I think that the episodes with the bookends make it very easy to understand what's trying to be said. On the same side, I think the movie version actually does a really good job of allowing you just to experience the story for itself. And the fact that it can do that, again, is just really impressive, especially since, obviously originally it was not written that way. And so I think it speaks to kind of the genius of Lucas as somebody who is a good editor, right? So yeah, it's just, this stuff is great, man. I'm so glad. I've just really been enjoying the fact that we've been doing this show. And I think it's turned out to be, a lot more fun than I thought it would be.
I've had a blast. I really do. I really love this show. I think it's an underrated gem. Yeah, there's going to be bumpy episodes along for the ride. Every show has them, but then you get these kind of things. You're like, wow, this is some of the best television I've ever watched. It's just like,
yeah.
It's just like, wow, how did we know? Now you understand now, though, looking at it in retrospect, why it probably didn't do as well, because, when you hear the name Indiana Jones, you're not thinking about the first part of it. Yeah, you're probably on board with that. But then the second part, you're kind of like, wait, what is this? This is like we're getting into theology and philosophy, but that wasn't necessarily, the kid, the teen 20 somethings, 30 somethings who grew up with Raiders of the Lost Ark and the other movies. It wasn't necessarily for them. It was for their little kid sister or kid brother watching, to learn a couple of things, along with learning about historical figures. How many kids today know about Albert Schweitzer? I would say probably not very many.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's the cool thing too, is like, you just look, George totally realizes the importance of history, right? And all of his stuff is rife with history, and Star Wars is that way. And so is Indiana Jones, and especially this show. And he is very clear in his understanding that if people don't understand history and the people that came before us, we're doomed to repeat it. And, George is obviously doing everything he can in his power to make sure that that doesn't happen. And I think there's a real genius to that. And it's the thing that makes this a great show. So, Yancy, if people did want to catch up with you.
Well, we didn't do our ratings. You didn't ask me.
Oh, yeah.
Ratings.
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. Yes. What are the ratings? Yes, that's what I meant to say. That's what I was going to say. What would you think, as we rate these two episodes, what do you think you're rating?
This is like some of the, for that era, this was some of the finest television of that era. I would easily 4.5, 5.0, maybe even. I mean, it's just... It just knocks it out of the park. Both episodes just really, and I think a lot of it has to do with it. They're written kind of with the intent that they're one continuous story, and I think that really helps. So that's where I'm falling on this.
I'm going to be right there with you. I absolutely think this is a 5. I think this is the first 5 of the series for me. If I remember correctly. With my rating so far. But it's just a really well done, well executed storyline on both sides. I think, like you said, this is clearly meant to be a duology that fits together as perfectly as possible. And I think it really does. And it really stands out. And the fact that, it can stand apart with the single episodes, or it can be put together so seamlessly as a film, is just a credit to the writing, and it's a credit to the people behind the scenes. And so, man, this is great stuff. But if people wanted to catch up with you and see what else you got going on, Yancy, or talk to you more about Indiana Jones or the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles or Star Wars or anything else, where do they find you?
Well, you can find me. My handle on pretty much every social media platform is Gallandro1. That's GALLANDRO1. That's named after the Bryan Daly villain from the Han Solo novels, Bounty Hunter. And you can find me on X, Threads. I go under my regular name under Facebook. It's Yancy Evans. But you can find me pretty much everywhere. And eventually, as I keep promising every episode, I will get around to getting back to my blog. It's just a lot of life has been getting in the way. Got a new grandkid, so that's kind of been taking some priority. So we'll get back to the blog at some point.
They always say life finds a way.
Yeah, exactly.
But, for these kind of things, it's like, life gets in the way, guys.
It does.
And it's got to take priority. So you can find me all over the place under the name MattRushing02 on social media. Of course, here on the network outside the 602 Club. Lots of great Star Trek talk with my good friend Chris Jones. And you can also find me over in the Nerd Party Network talking about Harry Potter, every single chapter of that series, one chapter at a time on Owl Post. And then I'm on Aggressive Negotiations with the great John Mills as we talk about Star Wars each and every week. But thank you so much for joining us. And y'all come back now. You're here.